Timmins James Bay.
Speaker.
The member from Carleton has been referring and reading from a letter, I believe, from the member from Vancouver Granville that apparently has been given to the Liberal caucus. So apparently the Liberal caucus members all have this letter. However, I'm not sure if the rest of the House does. I feel that him reading the letter and not tabling that document puts us at a disadvantage. So I'd ask if we need unanimous consent in order to table that letter so that all the House could actually have a copy of it.
Okay, the honourable member for Carleton has a point of order on this, or wants to comment on this point of order?
Yes, just out of respect for the House of Commons, I take this letter, which was written to the caucus chair of the Liberal Party and by the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Granville, and I offer to table it in the chamber with unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent to table this? No, I'm afraid we don't have unanimous consent. The honourable member for Carleton, please continue.
That's incredible.
It is remarkable that Liberal members would refuse unanimous consent to table a letter to Liberal members. You know, this is a letter from Liberals to Liberals, and Liberals want to ban it from tabling in the House of Commons.
This gets deeper.
And it goes on and on and on, Mr. Speaker. We have, though, in this, given the member across the way talks about personal attacks, this former Attorney General stood on the solid ground of truth. She first spoke truth to power, and when power wouldn't listen to truth, she spoke truth to the people. And when power contradicted truth, she provided evidence to prove truth. And now she's being punished for it. If this party, the once great party of Wilfrid Laurier and Saint Laurent and Mackenzie King, has descended to a point where someone is punished merely for telling the truth, what message are they sending to all Canadians? What message are they sending to young people who want to come and serve in this place? Tell the truth, you'll be called names, insulted. Your gender and your ethnicity will be raised as a point of contention. And finally, at the end of it all, you'll be kicked right out of your party altogether. That is not the message we should send to our young people. We should send them the message that this is a place full of truth tellers, full of people who will say what they know to be true. And more than that, full of leaders willing to accept the truth when they hear it. That is not the kind of leader we have at the head of the government today. Rather, he has played a game of cover-up, denial, contradiction, evasion, and finally, shutting down debate altogether. We have 2 parliamentary committees that have closed their doors to this matter because the Prime Minister's majority voted for them to do so. We have a Prime Minister who kept his members here all night long for 30 hours straight, voting in the House of Commons rather than just accepting a very simple demand from the official opposition that the former Attorney General be allowed to complete testimony before a committee. And now, the government refuses to end my speech by simply agreeing to my one simple demand, which is for a parliamentary committee, namely the Justice Committee, to convene all the witnesses who were involved in the political interference in the SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal, question them under oath and without restriction, and issue a final report that all Canadians can read before they vote in the next election. I am prepared to announce to this House that if the government announces right now it will agree to that demand, I will terminate my speech immediately. Otherwise, I will continue to speak about this absolutely fundamental issue at the heart of our democratic system and the rule of law. And there's nothing that members can do to silence members of the opposition on this. They might attempt to silence their own former ministers with threats, expulsion, denigrating comments in the media, but they won't silence members of the other side of the House. And ultimately, they will find that they cannot silence Canadians either. The people of Canada are too wise. They know that where there is smoke, there is usually fire. And in this case, there's a heck of a lot of smoke. You know, you have a prime minister changing his story from one day to the next, making statements that are soon disproven by written evidence and audio recordings. You have a prime minister shutting down an investigation at the Justice Committee and another investigation at the Ethics Committee. So here we have it, Mr. Speaker, a Justice Committee with no justice and an Ethics Committee with no ethics. That's what it's come to with this Liberal majority. But don't worry, they have a political strategy to get around it. Their plan, as witnessed by the motion we are now debating today, was the Liberal three-step. Massive scandal, step number one. Massive deficit spending to distract from it, step number two. And massive tax increase to pay for it all after the election, step number three. I've already spent a lot of time talking about step number one, the scandal itself. Let's talk about step number two, the massive deficit spending. Prime Minister famously promised in the lead up to the last election that the budget would balance itself. Said that it would happen in the year 2019. What do you know? That time has now arrived. So here we are, debating a budget with a deficit of $20 billion. Not zero, as the Prime Minister promised, but 20.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant has a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, about a minute ago, a member, I'm not sure where, delivered food to the member from Winnipeg North. He's consuming it at this moment. He's been consuming it for about the last 45 seconds or so. I know that's not allowed in the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like you to issue a directive on that one.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Guilty, Mr. Speaker. Someone handed me a little candy. I ate it. I'm sorry. I don't know if there's a way in which I could bring it up to satisfy the member across the way, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that I shouldn't have eaten the little candy inside the chamber, and I trust that there's no one else that eats candies inside the chamber. Sorry.
Remind the honourable members that consumption of food is not allowed. Water or sparkling water is. So I thank the honourable member for Brantford Brant for bringing that up. The honourable member for Carleton resuming debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, as I was saying,
Order, the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
My understanding is inside the chamber you're allowed to drink water. I don't know what it is that the Speaker has, but it doesn't look like it's just water, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering if you could share with us, no, it's the other glass, by your right hand. Attaboy. Mr. Speaker, I'm not too sure, but I don't think that's just straight water. Are you allowed to have other things in your water in order to deliver speech?
I'm afraid people are allowed to have water and sparkling water, but I'm not sure if the honourable member for Carleton wants to... there might be, is there lime in there or something? That's allowed.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the member wants me to submit my glass of water to a chemist so that it can be studied. It is a glass of water. I won't, it is, albeit a little bit cloudy, but, you know, and I won't blame it on the plumbing system in this 150-year-old building, but so far it hasn't killed me, so I am left to trust that it is, in fact, water. Thank you.
Member for Carleton, please continue.
Mr. Speaker. And I thank the member for his very substantive intervention on the matter at hand. So, as I was saying, there is the Liberal three-step. Massive scandal, massive deficit to distract from that scandal, and of course massive tax increases to pay for it all after the election. We're now on step number 2, the cover-up budget. The Prime Minister believed that he could extricate himself from this scandal by spraying $41 billion of new cash spending at Canadians in this recent budget. There, you know, would be a chicken in every pot, he told us. And the money certainly did flow. That spending, as I said, is $41 billion on a cash basis, or $23 billion if you use accrual accounting. Either way, it's a lot of money. And he believed that if he could pile up that money on top of the scandal, no one would be able to peer through and see what was going on underneath it all, that Canadians would be so grateful to see dollar signs flying at them in the lead up to the election that they would forget all about his interference in a criminal prosecution and re-elect him to keep that money flowing. But the bad news for the Liberals is that Canadians know that it's their own money, that the Prime Minister has not generously bestowed upon them money of his own. He has taken it out of their pockets and out of their children's pockets through growing debt to pay for all of that spending. Now, he promised the deficit would never exceed $10 billion in any year. Well, multiple times it has been $20 billion. He said the total debt he would add is no more than $25 billion. Well, we're already up to $60 billion and headed to 3 times as much as he promised. He said the budget would be balanced in 2019, and yet here again we have a large deficit. Mr. Speaker, it's not just that he's breaking his word and spending excessively to little end and with few achievements. It's that he's putting us in this precarious situation of debt at a time when the world economy has done so well. In the first years of the Prime Minister's governance, growth in the U.S. economy was among its highest in over 2 decades. Of course, 1/5 to 2/5 of our economy is dependent on the United States. We often go as they go. Additionally, the government had huge cash pouring into its coffers as a result of the sugar high from booming housing markets in Vancouver and Toronto, unsustainable levels of housing speculation that led to tax revenues for the government. And of course, recovery in natural resources prices from their historic lows the year before the Prime Minister took office. In other words, everything went in his favor. He inherited much good fortune in his public life just as in his private life, and he squandered all of it. Not only did he receive massive revenue windfalls, vastly exceeding what anyone had projected only years ago, not only did he spend every penny of those windfalls, he then went $20 billion deeper in deficit year after year after year. Here's the problem. What happens when things go badly? You know, we live in a country that is susceptible to the impact of the global economy. We are a trading nation. In other words, problems abroad can very quickly arrive on our shores. We all remember in 2008 when the U.S. financial crisis struck. It was a crisis that hit Canada from abroad, but one that affected us nevertheless. Now here is the good news. Governments, both Liberal and Conservative, paid off a phenomenal amount of debt in the roughly 10 years leading up to that crisis. To their credit, the then Martin Chrétien governments ran surpluses and paid down debt. They understood that when you make hay when the sun shines. Then, when Harper and Flaherty took office, they too paid off about $40 billion of debt. Combined, well over $100 billion had been wiped out from our national debt in just over a decade, and it had shrunk to the lowest level as a share of GDP of any country in the G7. This allowed us an enormous buffer So when that crisis struck, we were in a position to absorb the impact, to protect our citizens, to lower rather than raise taxes as countries outside of, around the world had done in order to recover their plummeting revenues. We were able to lower the GST from 7 to 6 to 5%, to bring income taxes down, particularly on low-income people, to raise 1 million people off the tax rolls, to bring in a working income tax credit that effectively gives a pay bonus to the lowest income workers, to bring in tax credits for kids' sports, public transit, tradesmen's tools, and numerous other targeted savings for individual Canadians. We were able to drop the small business tax rate and lower the corporate rate from 22 to 15%, all helping our people and businesses plow through that terrible global recession almost, not entirely, but almost unscathed. We went in last to the recession, came out first. We had 1 million jobs coming out of that recession. And we were among the first countries in the developed world to balance our budget. And when it was all over, our debt as a share of GDP had actually remained the same, which is extraordinary given the time all around the world where Americans and Europeans were just stacking up massive debts in relation to the size of their economies. UNICEF marveled at how child poverty actually fell in Canada during the Great Global Recession, while children around the world were falling perilously into want. That was, yes, due to good economic management at the time, but if we're being fair about it, it was also due to the decisions of leaders of both parties in the late 90s right through to the mid-2000s to pay off debt and prepare our country for troubled times ahead. This Prime Minister, who inherited good times by contrast, has squandered them completely and rendered us extraordinarily vulnerable for the trouble that may be ahead. And we already see signs of that trouble. Canadians' households are among the most indebted in the OECD. Their levels of household debt are about $1.75 for every dollar of income, a massive increase over the last several years. This makes them vulnerable to increases in interest rates. Furthermore, if you add household, corporate, and government debt together, we have a higher debt to GDP ratio than Greece by that measurement. Greece, of course, has much more government debt as a share of its economy, but we have much more household debt as a share of ours. Our economy, we have one economy, and it has to support all that debt. All three categories, household, corporate, and government, are all supported by the same $2 trillion Canadian economy. And the more you add to that debt, the more difficult it becomes for the economy to carry it around. So, what would be the wise course of action? Wise course of action would be to live within our means today, make adjustments now before it's too late. There's good news and bad news. The good news, we're not broke yet. The bad news, another 4 years of this Prime Minister, and we will be. And when that happens, life gets ugly. It becomes unavoidable that difficult decisions, not pleasant ones, will have to occur if we don't make the modest adjustments now that can avoid those difficult times. Kind of like in a situation of a family that sits around its kitchen table and says, you know something, we're not going bankrupt, we're not on the edge of losing our house or our car, but we notice that our debt is growing more and more every year. And if we keep doing this, in about 5 or 6 or 7 years, we will, as a family, be in a crisis. So you have, that family then says, we have two options. Option one is just to say, listen, let's enjoy the good times while they last. Let's forget about the future. And when the repo man knocks on the door in 6 years, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? Or the family could say, you know, we could make a few adjustments now. They're not particularly painful, that maintain our existing quality of life, without adding further to our debt and our vulnerability. That option will ensure that 6 years hence the family is in solid ground, savings built up, debt paid down, a house secured with a small mortgage, and enough financial freedom to make good decisions for the future. The other option, the one the Prime Minister has our country following right now, is for the family just to keep on spending until the repo man knocks on the door. That's not how Canadians run their household finances, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who did not inherit a family fortune or a multi-million-dollar trust fund knows what the Prime Minister has never understood, that budgets don't balance themselves, you can't borrow your way out of debt, and you can't make others pay for your mistakes. Every Canadian family that has had to pay a bill or raise a child without inherited wealth knows that that is the basic reality of life. Unfortunately, families who are sitting around that kitchen table are finding life more and more difficult. Wages have been absolutely flat since this Prime Minister took office. He's raised taxes on middle-class families by $800, and that doesn't even include the carbon tax, which kicked in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick yesterday, or the increases to CPP premiums that he's imposing right across the country outside of Quebec. So families are getting by with less and less. They're telling us that they're getting by, but they're not getting ahead. The mission of our leader, the Conservative leader, is to open up a free enterprise, low-tax economy where people can actually get ahead through their own hard work. And that has a little something to do with his life story. He's the son of a working-class family, paid his way through university by working at a restaurant before he moved to Saskatchewan from Ottawa and met his wife and worked in insurance before he was elected to Parliament. He didn't have a famous last name, but he managed to win by working really hard and showing that he had the right values and experience for his Saskatchewan community. And then he won the support and the respect of colleagues from across party lines to become the Speaker of the House of Commons, possibly the youngest in Canadian history. What's most amazing about this story is that most people who would have a career trajectory like that would have relied on a family lineage, a well-connected family with a big name. This particular leader had none of those things. He sure had a great family. They were rich in love and common sense and good values, but they weren't rich in money. And he took those working class values to work here on Parliament Hill. He wants to create a country where everyone else can get ahead the way he did, just by working hard, putting forward his best foot and trying his best to serve others. That's how he got ahead, and that's how other Canadians want to get ahead when they walk out the door in the morning to go to their job. They should have the right to get ahead through their hard work and through their own enterprise. And we should create a free market economy where that is possible, where everyone gets ahead based on meritocracy rather than aristocracy. And that is the Canada that this Conservative leader is attempting to build with a platform that allows people to get ahead. And he's already started to make, to clarify exactly what that means. He'll, for example, cancel the carbon tax to make life more affordable and take GST off home heat so we don't punish Canadians for staying warm in Canada's record winters. He's decided that he would take taxes off of EI maternity and parental benefits so that it's more affordable for moms and dads to stay with their children in those first precious 6 to 9 months after a child is born. These are just the early announcements that he has made that will be designed to allow Canadians to get ahead. And basically, the formula also has 3 parts, which is government should live within its means, leave more in people's pockets, and let them get ahead. Live within its means, leave more in people's pockets, and let them get ahead. And the conservative platform of our leader will be based on those three pillars of the stool. They are the same pillars that he and his family lived by when he grew up in a very working class neighborhood here in Ottawa. They didn't have a car. He took the bus everywhere. I guess that's one thing that he and the Prime Minister had in common. They both had a driver. And the difference is the Prime Minister had a chauffeur and the Leader of the Opposition had a bus driver. But they both had drivers. And so he's fond of telling the story of how hard it was to get a date by asking a girl if she'd meet him at a bus station. But I guess that was one of the ways he was able to gain his skill of persuasion that he has brought to bear on his political life. But that's ingenuity, right? People who come from modest means are able to become creative and inventive in making the most of what they're given. And that's the great Canadian dynamism, right? You know, it's the voyageurs who traveled across the country in canoes, our first peoples who survived in this wretched climate for so many thousands of years with nothing but their own courage, ingenuity, and hard work. These people set the example of how you can survive in this country of ours. Then, of course, the pioneers who came and broke in the land so that we could farm and we could create some of the most prodigious crops anywhere in the world. From the prairies to the farm fields of central Canada and beyond, to now the modern wineries that we have growing in the beautiful Niagara or in the Okanagan region. These are all examples that go back thousands of years of Canadian ingenuity where people, very simply, got by through their own hard work. That is what the Leader of the Opposition wants to be possible again. And what I think frustrates him is when he travels across the country, he sees how hard people are working. But they tell him they feel like they're on a treadmill that's getting faster and faster and faster. So they're running harder, but they're not moving forward, right? Because every time they put one foot in front of the other, the government keeps pulling them back. You know? Think of the number of taxes you're hit with. I was talking with a young guy the other day on the doorstep, and he's saying, look, every time I take a breath, I pay a tax in this country. He earns his income. He pays income tax. And then, oh, did I mention he's got to pay payroll tax on the same income? Then what's left after that, he goes out and makes a purchase. Well, he's got to pay HST on that purchase. So another bite is taken out of that dollar. Now, we've got something called a carbon tax, which hits him every time he drives to work or heats his home or buys something that is transported or made using energy. And then, God forbid, if he's tired of all the taxes and he decides he needs a beer, well, he gets hit by another sin tax for the crime of drinking one, an escalator tax that actually rises automatically every single year, even without holding a vote in the House of Commons. So this is just one young person saying, you know, on that $1 he earns from his own hard work, how many bites are taken out of that dollar to pay for the growing cost of government? And government has grown in cost since this Prime Minister took office just 3.5 years ago by 25%. Does anybody believe they're getting 25% better or services or products from the Government of Canada? Really, look around you. The roads are in worse condition. Our hospital wait times continue. What extra service of rural communities are not getting enough policing to protect against crime? So they're all paying 25% more for the cost of government, and what are they getting in return? You know, the average person goes to a grocery store and sees the prices have gone up by 25% and they don't get anything extra for the additional cost. You know what they do? They go and shop at a different grocery store. That's the competitive system of the free market, and I believe they will go shopping for a better alternative in the next election. And that alternative will be based on the sound principles that allowed Canadians to advance throughout the ages. A system of free market where people voluntarily exchange work for wages, investment for interest, product for payment, so that every participant was always better off. You know, Mr. Speaker, if I have an apple and you have an orange, and I want what you have, you want what I have, and we trade, we're both better off, even though between us we still have an apple and an orange. And that is the genius of the free market system. Everybody can sacrifice what they have for something they want more, as long as they find someone willing to do the inverse on the other side. In other words, every single time a free market transaction occurs, the participants must believe they are better off than they were before they did that transaction. So the young person, like the Leader of the Opposition, when he got a job working at a restaurant, he believed that sacrificing that 4 hours 3 or 4 times a week was worth it because the wage was worth more than his time. And for the restaurant owner, his time was worth more than the wage he had to pay to get it. In other words, in that voluntary exchange, both worker and employer believed they gained from the exchange. We know that because they both voluntarily agreed to participate in it. That
Un appel au règlement, l'honorable député.
Point of order, the Honourable Member for Mégantic-les-Robes. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I've listened to my colleague talk about trade. And I know that many of my colleagues this morning, since 10, have tried to bring back the debate on the emergency debate that I'm calling for the House to hold on the canola crisis. Unfortunately for my colleagues, I wasn't present in the House, so we couldn't get back to the item under routine proceedings, and because I wasn't here, we couldn't have proceeded with that. So, Mr. Speaker, given the importance of the canola crisis that we're currently facing and the fact that we need to examine the issue this evening to enable all members of the House to speak to it, to talk about the canola crisis, I would seek unanimous consent from my colleagues. Now, they didn't give unanimous consent this morning, but because I wasn't here. So I'd like to seek unanimous consent.
Est-ce que nous avons le...
Does the honourable member have unanimous consent? Sadly, there is no unanimous consent. The honourable member for Carleton. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And despite the fact that my honourable colleague interrupted me, I must say that I am happy to see a member rise in the House to defend our agricultural producers. Our canola farmers are suffering a great deal because of trade action taken by China. The Conservative Party simply wants to hold a debate to protect farmers, to enable them to continue to sell their good quality product on the international scene and on the international market. I'm astonished to see that the government doesn't want to participate in an important debate like that. Honestly, it's disgusting to see the government show such indifference in light of a crisis of that scope. I know that there aren't any Liberals who represent farmers out west, but at least the Prime Minister should represent all Canadians, regardless of whether or not they vote for the Liberal Party. So this gives me an opportunity to underscore the fact that our country is becoming divided. 3 years ago, everyone said, well, there's no more Bloc Québécois sovereignty in Quebec. It's finished. We're no longer talking about it. following 10 years of Harper. Yes, there were a number of Quebecers who didn't agree with all of Conservative policies or the Conservative Party, I will admit that, but at least everyone could agree that the sovereigntist movement had almost disappeared. The Bloc québécois, the Parti québécois were no longer political strengths. What a change now under the Liberals, where the sovereigntist movement fed off the sponsorship scandal in the past. That was a monumental issue. In 2015, the sovereigntist movement ceased to exist across the country, and that's an important fact. And I think it's because the Harper government, regardless of whether or not any people agreed with his agenda, he respected provinces, their autonomy, and their people. He increased the power of citizens in our various communities and reduced the power of the federal government. And that helped everyone to see themselves in this country, to realize that Canada could work for them, even if they didn't vote for the Conservative Party of the day. But now let's talk about today. 3 years later, 3 years after the government took the reins of power, the Bloc québécois is making a comeback in the polls in Quebec. And in the West, Western Canada, polls are now showing that almost half of Albertans are open to the issue of sovereignty. That's a tragedy. Now, I was born in Calgary. I spent more than 20 years in southern Alberta. I would have never thought that we would reach a point where people in the West would be talking about sovereignty. Now, sure, there were always some concerns about government powers, federal government powers. There were complaints. But we didn't talk about sovereignty out West, not when I was young. Now we're hearing voices. We can see that there's division. And that's exactly what we should be avoiding. We need a prime minister who brings Canadians together from sea to sea to sea, for in this wonderful country where all Canadians can be proud, completely proud. I don't think there are any Albertans, or rather, people out West believe in Canada, like Canada. They're very patriotic. But seeing a prime minister attack them time and time again, be it on pipelines, the carbon tax, or through other policies that target the Western economy, we can understand why there's so much frustration among members of the people living there. I think a Conservative government will bring Canadians back together in an environment of respect that allows for freedom for the provinces in this country and for all Canadians. And we can see that these are what the great prime ministers did, Laurier among others, in bringing Canadians together. And we seem to forget that out West, Laurier was the most popular, was the leader rather, the most popular leader in the 20th century. And we forget that because at the time it was the Liberal Party that was in favor of free trade and the autonomy of the provinces throughout the country. So that's why And it's hard to believe today, clearly, but that's why it was popular out west. But they abandoned that openness, that economic openness, in favor of an agenda where everything is controlled by federal politicians. And that centralizing approach, which attempts to focus all power at the center, ends up dividing Canadians. And so that's why the Conservative Party will reduce the power of the central government and increase in power for Canadians. And in doing so, will bring Canadians closer together, back together.
And so there you have it, Mr. Speaker. We have a team here that is speaking about the Prime Minister's personal and political interference in the SNC-Lavalin scandal, is speaking about the cover-up budget that is designed to make Canadians forget about that political interference, and is shifting also attention to the issues that the Prime Minister is incapable of managing, like the multi-billion-dollar attack by the Chinese government on our canola producers. The Prime Minister is incapable of responding to these kinds of international crises because he is absolutely consumed with scandal. He and his party are meeting right now talking about how they can punish courageous whistleblowers. They're not meeting with representatives of the People's Republic of China to get these tariff penalties removed. They're too busy trying to cover up a scandal of the Prime Minister's own making. So that it is not just the ethical deterioration that we see in this scandal, it is the distraction that it causes. Wouldn't you like to know right now, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is at his desk busily working on a strategy to end this trade attack by China? He is not. He's busy working, huddled with advisors, trying to find a way to punish whistleblowers, courageous women in his own party, for daring to tell the truth about his conduct. Wouldn't you like to know that he is busily on the phone with his ambassador in Washington discussing a plan to end Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and softwood, or to end Trump's Buy America policy that discriminates against Canada? No, he's not doing that. Right now, he's busy huddled up with a group of political advisors trying to hatch a plan to cover up a scandal and punish the women who exposed it. Wouldn't you like to know that the Prime Minister is busy meeting with finance officials, urgently crafting a plan to phase out the deficit over the medium term and prepare us for troubled times that might be in our future? But, well, we know that even if he weren't distracted by scandal, the deficit wouldn't be of the least bit of concern, because of course we know he thinks that budgets balance themselves. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, I will allow you I will cede the floor to you for Standing Order 31 statements by saying that we need to have a Prime Minister who is not capsizing in his own ship of corruption and scandal, but instead is working hard every single day to serve the Canadian people and get the job done so that Canadians can get ahead.
Statements by members. Déclaration